Sup guys? In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at some data I gathered from testing Eldritch against this month's Arbiter hard mode, and comparing it to similar comps not using Eldritch. In theory, Eldritch's Operation Rainbow skill should be able to double the EHP of your Vanguard, assuming optimal conditions, but in practice, the damage received in battle comes in bursts, so you can't quite predict how much it's going to help until you actually use it. Take a look at these missile strikes from the Arbiter. If you're against an enemy who does one big AoE attack like this, every 11 seconds and then nothing else, it will completely bypass the skill, and the effect will be 0, regardless of the uptime. I think that it would be more helpful to look at survival as a binary. Looking at the Hermit fight, most of it is chill, with the exception of 2 dangerous attacks. The first is the missiles from before. She does the attack once at 1 minute remaining, and a much more powerful version of it at 5 seconds remaining into the battle. These deal a ton of damage, but the first round usually isn't enough to be a threat to the Vanguard. The second dangerous attack happens at 20 seconds remaining in the fight. The blue orbs that she fires during this phase might not look dangerous, but they can easily shred through even the bulkiest of ships. Between the blue orbs and the final missile strikes, there's pretty much nothing going on. So as long as the Vanguard can get past the blue orbs, they will make it to the last airstrike, regardless of how low they are. The last round of airstrikes finish at around 4 seconds remaining into the battle, so the missile attack at the end doesn't really make much of a difference with regard to the performance of the fleet. The most important part is to at least survive the blue orbs to make it to the last round of airstrikes. For the tests, I did 10 runs with 3 different Vanguard configurations. First, I wanted to see the impact of using Eldritch in the off-tank position. I used Portland as the primary tank because she's consistent, but not remotely tanky enough to survive this fight alone, especially at level 120. The middle position is the most protected, and you'd typically want to get away with as much of a high damaging ship as possible, so I put Kazagumo with no defensive auxiliaries to emphasize the impact of Eldritch. On Eldritch herself, I used the damage control protocol auxiliary, but it didn't proc a single time, so I did not use it for Laffy later on, since it didn't really come into play for Eldritch. It will not make a difference, as you will see later on. In the second fleet, I replaced Eldritch with Laffy 2, who should theoretically have no issue surviving until the end, but won't be able to protect the other Vanguards as well as Eldritch. In the third fleet, I replaced Portland with A-Gear and kept Laffy in to see what would happen if I just used 2 of the best tanks rather than Eldritch. The raw footage of all the testing that I'm going to be discussing in this video will be linked in the description. Looking at the results of the first fleet, Portland went down in about half the battles, but Kazagumo and Eldritch survived until the end consistently. This is because Operation Rainbow activates consistently during the Blue Orbs attack due to the sheer volume of attacks, but just not always in time to save Portland. However, Portland's role is just to soak up damage, and having Kazagumo and Eldritch survive until the end ensures that the damage of the carriers is maximized on the last airstrike. I also counted the number of procs of Operation Rainbow, which turned out to be 3 most of the time. This ends up being an uptime of approximately 1/3 of the fight. However, it is actually advantageous that it only procs when Eldritch is being hit a lot. If instead, it activated automatically in 20-second intervals, then it would activate once at 30 seconds remaining, expire at 20 seconds remaining, and then activate again at 10 seconds remaining, which would do absolutely nothing for the dangerous blue orb attack. Higher uptime does not necessarily mean better results, and this is a perfect example of that. Now, let's take a look at the result of replacing Eldritch with Laffy 2. The difference is quite glaring, which is to be expected. Portland sank early every time, and Kazagumo would sink within at most 6 seconds of Portland going down, usually even closer, with the exception of the second last run, where she sank even earlier at 33 seconds remaining, which never happened with Eldritch in the fleet. Surprisingly, even as the off-tank, Laffy had a lot of trouble surviving until the last round of airstrikes. While I could have given her the damage control protocol, which would have allowed her to stay alive until the end, Eldritch did not even need it, meaning that the same fleet with Eldritch is clearly better at surviving. Even with the damage control protocol, Kazagumo would still go down, decreasing the damage output of the last round of airstrikes quite significantly. Let's now take a look at the last fleet. I only recorded 9 runs instead of 10 like the other two because I wasn't counting carefully, but the result is quite clear. Surprisingly, at least one of the 2 tanks managed to barely get by the blue orbs phase in every run, but once again, Kazagumo ended up going down every single run. I believe this does check out with my original theory, in that you could run Eldritch as an off-tank, with a ship that isn't particularly squishy, but not quite a tank as the main tank, and it'll lead to better results. For example, you could replace Portland with Unzen or Jinsu meta here, and the combination of one of them plus Eldritch would probably have better damage output and survivability compared to Aegir and Laffy, while making sure Kazagumo survives until the end and increasing the total damage of the fleet. In conclusion, I do believe that my placement of Eldritch ahead of Laffy is justified, although similar testing on other fights would solidify my opinion further, or perhaps change my mind. These results are quite specific to this boss's attack patterns, but the protection for the middle ship, and the fact that Operation Rainbow tends to not get wasted when Eldritch is not being hit a lot, should play to her advantage most of the time. Now, I do also want to update my Vanguard tier list again. First, I'm going to move Napoli beside Anchorage, because she's probably just going to be a more consistent tank most of the time. Anchorage can fail to proc her torpedo barrage, and then the timing of her smokescreen gets shifted forward, which may lead to undesirable results. In case you forgot or just didn't know though, one position within the same tier means pretty much nothing on these tier lists, and there could be almost as many situations where Anchorage is better than Napoli, though I just think Napoli is going to be better and easier to use more of the time. With that, I'm going to drop Yatsen and Cheshire down to B tier. While Yatsen is among the tankiest ships in the game, with decent damage output and anti-air, she does have to pair with, at best, Harbin in campaign, which is where she is most useful, and the single target specialists of the DDGs are not great options there. However, there are plenty of both damage options better than Harbin to choose from, such as Bayard, Kronstadt, Watarase, Ibuki, and so on, while there are also tanks that are tanky enough to offer more in other ways than Yatsen, like Napoli, with her better damage, and Brest with her healing, and also not locking one of your Vanguard slots to Harbin. As for Cheshire, I think she's more in line with Scylla, having better anti-air but worse damage, and also better bulk but not enough to main tank with no help. I think the tier list looks pretty good now, given the data I have, but I might like to trim the B tier a bit as it's getting quite crowded. In the upcoming days, I'll try to take another look at battleships again as well. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.